Hello everyone, this is Sudhir and I have Richa with me here today. In this video, we would like to talk about a feature which can be very helpful for you to analyze each and every transaction of yours. This feature is called as Audit Trail. Richa, can you throw some light on it?
Yeah, sure. Um, so many merchants have raised us queries around transactions, that how transactions are working and where exactly the transactions are failing. They usually don't have that visibility. So this particular audit trail will help them in debugging at least certain level of queries. This audit trail contains list of all the sequential API calls that are happening between the three stakeholders, that is merchant, Juspay, and the underlying payment gateway. So every API call that is happening between the three entities will be logged within this. It will have, it will be highlighting if there are any error codes in the API calls. It will also give you proper request and response logs within the audit trail.
Okay, that sounds like a lot of useful information that is now merchant facing. Can you first explain, first things first, how can a merchant access this details?
So any merchant who has the access of orders module within the EC operations in the Juspay dashboard can view the audit trail. I can explain by taking a dummy order ID.
Right.
So I have logged into my account and I have a dummy order ID with me. So I'll just search for that particular order ID, and on the first tab itself, you can see a view transaction journey tab here. If you click on that, you will have an access to the audit trail.
Okay, sounds good. So it's tagged against each transaction, I guess. Right?
Yeah.
I can think of a few scenarios where I think this will be very handy for the merchant, and I would like to sort of delve deep into those scenarios first. One common issue that our merchants come to us is with, they have configured the webhook on our portal, but they don't seem to receive those webhooks. Can you show how Audit Trail can be useful in debugging these kind of scenarios?
Yeah, definitely. I can explain you by taking an example. So I have a demo order ID where the same situation happened, where the merchant actually configured webhook in the Juspay dashboard, but they were not receiving it. So let's jump to the audit trail for this order ID. Now, this order ID contains all the exhaustive list of API calls that had happened between the three stakeholders. So let's go through each of them and try to understand if we can solve our problem with that. So the first log contains here says that the Juspay has received the transaction request for the merchant. So this seems to be like a 200 response. So this was a successful call. Second is where Juspay has received the tokenization eligibility request. Again, this was a successful call. Third is when pay you as the gateway was decided for the transaction attempt. This again was a successful call. Now, because the transaction has been created at this particular time, if merchant has opted for transaction created webhook, we will be triggering that to the merchant. In this case, that has been opted. And I could see that this particular call has an issue. Okay. And the webhook was sent out, but it was failed with a 500 response. This means that Juspay did trigger a webhook, but it was not successfully consumed at the merchant end. And that is the reason we have received a 500 response here. We can also see the detailed request parameter that was sent out in this webhook. And you can also see the response that was received. In this, you can see that there was a failure response that we got. And that is the reason merchant did not receive it. It probably would have failed at the server level at the merchant end. So they can actually go and rectify their server details, and unless and until they send a 200 response, it will not be marked as consumed.
Got it.
Yeah.
So that's very useful, I would say. But I just have a quick follow up there. In this particular case, there seems to be an issue at the merchant's server end, and that is why they didn't end up consuming it. But we have seen cases in the past where Juspay itself has not triggered that webhook, maybe because we haven't got that information from the underlying PG. I mean, the reasons can be various, but how does those scenarios appear in this audit?
Right. So, in that case, if the Juspay has Juspay itself has not triggered the webhook, right? This particular log won't be present that transaction created webhook was triggered. This log itself would be missing. So by that we can figure out that okay, Juspay itself has not triggered.
I think that answers my question. So I would like to just move away from this and talk about another scenario that merchants usually face. We find that the transactions have failed, and generally the error message that's on the dashboard is authorization failure or authentication failure, and it's not very clear as to what is to be done after that. Can you throw some light on those kind of situations?
Yeah, sure. So now let's take an example where the order ID has been a failure. I have a dummy order ID with me. This has a transaction status as authorization fail. Let's open the audit trail. Here, let's deep dive into the logs again. So the first log says the transaction request was received by Juspay, that is success. PayU was decided as the gateway, that is also success. A transaction created webhook was triggered to the merchant, even that was done. Now V2 pay start was loaded, that is also a success response. Now Juspay has initiated the transaction with PayU, so that is also a success. But if you see the next log line, this actually highlights that some issue is found in this log. Let's see what it is. This is where Juspay has received the response from PayU. Now, if you see the response from PayU here, it says that insufficient funds in your account. So here, if you see, right, the error code and error reason has been highlighted. And this log line was also highlighted by saying that some issue has been found here. So this particular transaction got failed because the customer account doesn't had the sufficient balance to fulfill the order. So this is how we can actually see a failure case as well.
Got it. Seems pretty intuitive. And just again, a quick follow up here. Like in this particular case, the error code and the error message was very clear, as it was very clear from the PG's end. But as you know, like, it's not always the case that way. What can a merchant do when it's not clear? Like whom should they reach out to? How do they go about that?
Sure. In that case, once you have spotted the log that throws the error, right? You have a functionality of actually copying the request and the response parameters here. You can copy the request and response parameters and directly write to the underlying PG to understand what is the meaning of that error. So you can copy the parameters from here and write to the underlying PG.
Got it. Moving on from that, one other common thing that merchants usually report is that the payment page is opening and they choose a payment instrument to make the payment, and when they pay, it just redirects back to the merchant's page itself. So how do you go? Is it possible to debug those kind of scenarios with Audit Trail, and what could be the issue there?
Yeah, definitely we can debug those sort of issues as well. Now, again, let's debug with a dummy order. So this is an order where a customer reported the same issue, that they tried doing a transaction, but they were directly redirected to the return URL and the transaction was failed.
Okay.
So let's jump to the audit trail. So now, instead of actually going through each and every log line here, you also have a functionality of filtering the issue log out. So if you can see a filter issue tag here, you can just toggle it on and it will just directly highlight the logs that are actually a failure, where actually the issue was found. You can directly jump onto that. Or for this particular order ID, you can see that when Juspay was initiating the transaction to pay you, that particular log was failed. And the error reason was the detail posted are incorrect. So again, as the error is not self-explanatory, we can just copy the logs from here and directly write to the underlying PG to understand what it means.
Okay, and that explains it.
Yeah.
Okay, that is pretty clear. Now I'd like to talk about another scenario, which is again a very common query that comes up from the merchants. Usually, when we use gateway reference ID or when we configure PGs with gateway reference IDs, there always seems to be some issues with respect to the transactions. How would those kind of transactions look like? How would the audit trail for those kind of transactions where there were issues due to gateway reference ID look like? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So In the case where usually gateway reference ID is configured and the transaction is not happening, in that case, there is one internal Juspay API that get fails. Okay. So let's try understand what that API is and how we can see if that resolves our issue. So I have a dummy order ready. I'll jump to that. In that case, if you see, right, the order status will always be new and the transaction status is always started. Right? The transaction status is started because the transaction API of Juspay fails. So that is covered in the audit trail. So the first log line is when Juspay receives the transaction request from the merchant. This API itself fails. If you can see that the issue is found in this API, if you click on that, if you see the response, there is some error here, right? Because this is Juspay's internal API, you can copy the request and the response, and then you can reach out to Juspay support team for knowing more about it. But it's mostly because there would have been a gateway reference ID already configured under PG Control Center, and the merchant has not passed us during creation of the order.
Yeah, I think that should explain a lot of transaction issues that merchants face.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are watching and are wondering what gateway reference ID is, there is a link in description for a video on gateway reference ID. You can go through it to get the full detail on that. Okay. So I think we have covered quite a few scenarios where we are talking about transactions that the final customer makes to the merchant. Now, I would like to also touch upon the refunds that the merchants can issue to their customers. So, does Audit Trail cover those kind of? Does Audit Trail cover the refunds part also? Can you explain on that?
Yeah, so similar to transaction, we have an audit trail for refunds as well. So let's understand how to access it with an example. I'll navigate to an order ID where the refunds were initiated. You need to scroll down to the refund details section. Here you can see 2 refunds were initiated. If you open any one, on the left side you can see the refund details to that. On the right side you can see the audit trail. This audit trail of refund contains all the events that had happened between the 3 entities, that is the merchant, Juspay, and the underlying gateway.
So now that you've spoken about refunds, like I want to touch upon one of the most common queries that we always get. That is, how do you check the refund status, and will Audit Trail be helpful in doing that?
Yeah, sure. We can cover the top 3 questions that merchant usually raise for refunds, and we can try to understand how to debug using the audit trail.
Because the first thing I would like to understand is how to check the refund status.
Okay, sure. So refund status could be found in the Juspay dashboard also, and we can find it within the audit trail as well. I'll tell you how we can do both. Let's take an example of a success refund. I have searched for the order ID. I'll navigate to the refund section. Here you can see 2 refunds were initiated, and status is mentioned right away here within the tab itself. You can also find it in the audit trail. If you navigate to audit trail, the first log says that we are sending webhook to the merchant. So whatever is the status of the refund, we are initiating a webhook for that. The first even says that. And second is status updated. So the status of the refund has been updated, has been covered in this log. And you can see the status as success. That means the refund was success and the status has been updated. So that is how you can find the refund status within audit trail as well.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, that was pretty explanatory. Next thing I would like to cover on the refunds part is how is it possible for the merchant to check the refund ARN using this?
Yeah, sure. So refund ARN gets generated once the refund has been successful and has been successfully credited to the customer. So let's take example of a success order and we can check the refund ARN for that. So I'll navigate to that particular order, go to refund details and open the refund tab. Here, so as you know that ARN gets generated once the refund is successful. if you see the status is updated to success here, within the log, you can see the details, whatever we have received from PG. And one of the parameter is ARN. So you can find the ARN value within the status updated log as well.
Okay, that's pretty clear. Okay, I would like to touch upon one last thing, which is with respect to the webhooks part. Just like with the case of transactions, we've seen merchants come up to us and say, they don't receive the webhooks related to refunds as well. How can those kind of scenarios be dealt with using Audit Trail?
Sure. So similar things can be resolved via Audit Trail as well. I'll explain with an example. So I have an order ID where a similar issue happened, where merchant initiated the refund, but they never got the webhook of refund initiation or refund failure or success.
Okay.
So let's navigate to the refund audit trail for it. You can see the status is success here. So when the status is success, Juspay will initiate a refund successful webhook to the merchant if they have opted for that. So the first event says that sending webhook to merchant. This means that Juspay did trigger a webhook to the merchant. Okay. Now to check the status whether this webhook was consumed by the merchant or not, let's navigate to the webhook sections within the dashboard. Here you can see a list of all the events that were triggered. And one of it is order refunded. And this is notified as false. This is marked as false. This means that merchant did got the webhook, but they didn't consume it with a 200 response. Okay. So to receive a webhook, they will have to send Juspay a 200 response, and then only it will be marked as true here. That is, webhook is being notified now.
Okay, that's pretty clear.
Yeah.
I think we have covered quite a few scenarios where merchants face issues with whether it's with transactions or refunds, which can be solved using the Audit Trail tool that we have now. I would like to. I just have a few general questions around Audit Trail. Like, is there any latency in terms of when the transaction is done and when the data, like the data that we get from Audit Trail, is available to the merchant?
Yeah. So the audit trail for transaction gets updated after 15 minutes of order creation.
Right.
Whereas there is no latency in updation in case of refunds. So as soon as you initiate a refund, the refund audit trail starts getting populated.
Okay. So far, I have come up with scenarios which merchants usually have come up to us, which we can resolve using Audit Trail. Are there any features or any specific aspects of Audit Trail that you would like to touch upon?
Within the audit trail, there are certain features also that we have covered here. So here you can see an order details tab that covers general detail for this particular order ID, like what is the amount, what was the order ID, the created date, the gateway it was routed to, what was the payment method, it's MasterCard here, and what is the payment method type, that is card. So apart from this, you can also see a toggle here that says filter issues. So once you toggle this, we'll filter out all the logs that has where the actual issue was found. So using this, you can actually directly go to that particular log where it has failed. It will be a very helpful case when there are a lot of logs for that particular order. Apart from that, you can also directly search a log within the audit trail. Let's say if I want to search whether the transaction created webhook was being sent or not. So I'll just search transaction created and I could just directly navigate to that particular log.
Thank you, Richa. I think we have covered quite a few scenarios that merchants commonly come up to us for clarity on. I think from those watching this video, for any of your transactions, you can always analyze the transaction using the audit trail. And if there is an issue at your end, you can identify that and fix it right away. If there is an issue at Juspay, you can always write to us. And if it's a PG issue, again, you have all the logs and everything that is directly available to raise the issue directly with PG as well. So that also brings us to the end of the video. Thank you, everyone.